Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. In this video, we are going to take a look at a couple of books that have had their values come down. And as a result of this value decline, these books could represent a great buying opportunity, especially if these books have been on your list or on your radar for some time. Now could be the time to snag them. Stay tuned. All right, so the very first book that we're going to look at is already up on screen. It is All Star Comics issue number 58. And part of the reason why I wanted to show this book is because it is the first appearance of Power Girl. It is also a pretty fantastic cover. But with this book, what I want to do is to first look at the 9.8. And part of the reason why I selected the 9.8 is because of this low census count, but also because when you look at the values of this book overall, they are relatively low. And so if it were me, I would try to go after the 9.8, which has an FMV of around $1,600. And when we drill into this book, what we will see is that on the left-hand side, there has definitely been a decline in the present dollar value of this comic. At present, in September, this book was selling for $1,640. That was in September. And if we back up to July, this book was selling for $3,498. That represents an $1,860 roughly decline in the value of the first appearance of Power Girl. You can see again that in the graph here. You can also see it play out on the right hand side here. Now, what's interesting is when you look at some of the data, what you see is that the most recent sale for this book at a 9.8 was for off-white to white pages. Prior to that, all the sales roughly were all white pagers at a 9.8. So I'm not quite certain if that is why the price is what it is. It's just an interesting observation that I wanted to point out for people. I honestly don't think that it offset the value that much, but with a relatively small census count, it has potentially a more pronounced effect when one book sells for a lot less money. But let's back up one more page here, and we're going to look at one additional example. We're going to look at the 9.6, and unlike the 9.8, this has a slightly larger census count. There are 248 copies. There have been roughly 135 sales. This book at a 9.6 has a fair market value of $500, which is notably less than the 9.8. So let's go ahead and click on that. And what we see here is a slightly different story, I think. You know, when you look at the graph on the left-hand side, you see that the value of this book is presently at $512. And if we back up just a little bit, maybe to June, the book was at $455. And a little forward here, the book jumped up to $633 and now back down to $512. It's roughly pretty stable by and large. You know, the 9.6, in my opinion, when you look at its high water mark, it hit a high water at a 9.6 of roughly $1,000. And we are presently sitting again at 512. I think that was the high water mark, which is pretty high. And so again, if it were me and I were interested in getting this first appearance of Power Girl, I would potentially look at the 9.8. Secondarily, I would look at the 9.6. But there are a lot of people out there that love Power Girl, and now could be the time to actually snag this book as a result of what we are seeing with the value of that specific comic. So let's go ahead and take a look at the next example. And I would say that this next one is probably a much more popular character than is Power Girl. This is the first appearance of the Punisher. This is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 129, a fantastic book that I am pleased to have in my collection. And with this one, we're going to start in a slightly reverse order. We're going to look at a lower grade book first. And by lower grade, I mean an 8.0 versus a 9.8. This one has a healthy census count. There's 1,287 copies of this book on the census. There have been 536 sales. The fair market value for this book, according to Go Collect, is $2,350. And you can see how the value of this book looks as you go from the 1 year to the 90-day to the 30-day average. But let's drill down and let's see what we find here. And what you see is that there is definitely a pronounced decline in the value of this book. Not a precipitous drop, but definitely a decline. In September, this book was selling for $25.78, and if we back up to July, just as a point of reference, the book was going for $2,988. That represents a $410 decline from July to September of this year. And you can see the data down below. What's great about Go Collect is you have the ability to look at some of these individual sales. So I at least wanted to scroll through so you guys could see that. I want to look at two more examples of this first appearance of Punisher. We looked at just an 8.0. I want to look at a 9.0. Healthy number of books on the census, healthy number of sales. The fair market value for this book at a 9.0 is $3,300. Let's go ahead and click on that and drill down. And what we see here is roughly the same thing, not a precipitous drop, but definitely a decline in the value of this book. Back in April of 2021, this book was going for $5,100. It kind of sort of had a dip and then came back up to around $5,100. But as of October, this book is selling for $3,485, $3,485. And if we back up just a little bit to August, because there was no July sale, and I just use July as a point of reference, the book was selling in August for $38.90, and that represents about a $400 decline from August to October. All right, so similar decline as what we saw with the 8.0 for this comic. And I want to look at one last example. The last example, we're going to go up a few grades, or up a grade, I should say, to the 9.2. This book also has a healthy census count at 900 copies. Healthy number have exchanged hands, and the book is sitting at an FMV of $3,900. And when we drill into this one, what we see is a similar kind of curve here, or line, right? The book had a high water mark of 55.90 back in March of 2001, and at present this book is sitting at $4,043. And if we back up just a little bit, you can see, let's go back to July. The book was selling for roughly $4,100, which is, again, not a huge decline in value. This book is essentially holding its value. So the question would be, well, why am I recommending this book, right? Why am I recommending this one as potentially a book to pick up right now? I am making the recommendation because there's definitely been a downward slope in the value of this book, right? Not a huge fall off, but a downward slope. There have also been characters from the Netflix series that are being reintroduced into the MCU. We have Kingpin and, of course, Daredevil that have been reintroduced, or rumored to be reintroduced in the case of Kingpin. And so the question will be, is there the possibility for the Punisher to come over into the MCU? And one could argue that Daredevil and Punisher were two of the better Netflix shows. And so it would make sense in my mind to bring over the Punisher the same way that Daredevil and Kingpin are coming over. And so if that does indeed happen, this time right now could be a great time to actually pick up one of these comics, a copy of this at some grade. This potentially is the time, while there is this downward slope, because if there is some kind of announcement or some belief that Punisher is coming into the MCU, this trend line will not necessarily look the way that it looks right now. And so will it go back up? Probably. How high will it go? Who knows? Who knows how high it could go? But again, this video series is all about snagging these books now while they are potentially on a downward slope, or in advance of something that could reverse a downward trend. All right. So I want to look at one additional example, and I think this next example is again arguably an incredibly popular Marvel character. This is the first cameo appearance of Wolverine. This is Incredible Hulk issue number 180, and so with this book, this book represents a great way to get in on the Wolverine action, especially if you have been priced out of Wolverine 180, his first full appearance, or I'm sorry, Incredible Hulk 180. This could be a great way to get in on the action. And we know that Hugh Jackman is reprising his role as Wolverine and coming into the MCU. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of books here and see what we see. We're going to start off with the 9.0. There are roughly 500 copies of this on the census. About 200 sales of this book has an FMV of 1950. You can see what's happening with the value just at a glance from the 1 year to the 90 to the 30. But let's go ahead and click on it and let's look to see what the data looks like. And you can see from the graph that is a precipitous fall off in value. This book back in May of 2021 was $47.30. That is a significant amount of money. And arguably, this book should have never been that expensive. I think some people would make that argument. But again, if you're priced out of 181, where do you go? You potentially go to 180. And that's probably why we saw such crazy values over here. At present, this book is sitting at 1982. 1982 is where this book is sitting at present. And that's a huge fall off from May of 21 to the present day. A lot of people will say, well, we don't count 21. We don't count what happened in 21. I think you have to. I mean, the prices were outrageous, but the data are what the data are. You cannot necessarily ignore the data just because you don't like them or you believe that they were artificially inflated for various reasons. You still have to acknowledge that the data are there. But let's back up and let's look at, I think we're going to be able to get the July data here. So in July, this book was $26.39. And at present, it is $19.82. That is about a $660 decline between July and September. Again, is now the time to snag this book? I honestly don't know. I'm thankful that I already have a copy, technically 2 copies, but if you don't, if you're a Wolverine fan, is now the time. That is something that each of us is going to have to think about, at least each of us that needs a copy. The next book that I want to look at is an 8.5 of Wolverine of Incredible Hulk 180. This is the 8.5. There are 600 copies of this on the census for CGC, 250 sales. The book has an FMV of 1650. So let's go ahead and drill into this one and see what we see. And the curve or the lines here look a little different. They look a little different here for this one, right? When we zoom in, what we see is that in October, this book sold for $19.48. It sold for $19.48. And if we back up a little bit here, in September, this book was going for $15.36. $15.36 is what it was going for in September. And if we back up a little bit more in July, $15.92. And so this looks a little bit different, right? Because now we have that book dropping in value, having a little bounce, and then a bigger bounce, right? I think that increases about $350 some odd dollars as you look at what happened in July to October, about $355. The question will be, will you see a previous bounce or a bounce with some of the other grades that have reached their bottom and now might go up as a result of Hugh Jackman reprising his role or people getting priced out of Hulk 181? This is why I do the video series, because potentially there could be an opportunity here for people to be able to pick this book up. Again, if it's been on someone's radar, you can look here down at some of the data, individual sales of an 8.5, a couple of off-white to white, and then a cream to off-white here, all roughly in the same ballpark. That one may be a little high at 1948, but still, it is what it is. So again, a couple of books that might have some potential, right? If these are books that are on your list, if they are books that you've been looking at for a while, potentially now is the time. A lot of folks will say, well, I think that the bottom is going to fall. I think that things are going to drop. That could happen. That could happen, or the opposite could happen. None of us knows what the future holds, and so you have to decide when you want to get in, when you want to jump in. Some folks will decide to sit it out. Others will make some magic happen. Regardless of the decision that you make, it'll probably be the right one for you, at least for now. You may have some regret later on, but who knows what's going to happen. With that said, I want to wrap this video up. I want to thank you all for taking the time to watch. Let me know what you think of these books that have been picked. If you want me to look at a book that you're thinking about snagging, be certain to leave that comment in the comment section, and maybe your book will be featured in a future video. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.
Dirty rapper rolling.